Oh, I am just a student, sir, and only want to learn. But it's hard to read through the rosin smoke from the books that you like to burn. So I'd like to make a promise, and I'd like to make a vow, that when I've got something to say, sir, I'm gonna say it now.
You're listening to.
You're listening to.
You're listening to.
Y'all are listening to What's Left of the South.
Thank you for tuning in to What's Left of the South, a podcast about Southern working class history and current events through a leftist perspective. This podcast is brought to you by a horrible job market, testosterone levels, anxiety, living at home, aging parents, Ian Fidance, Kaiser removing people allegedly, Nelson telling himself every day in the mirror that it's not a codependent relationship with your mother if you're Italian, Tyler's hiatus, which will inevitably lower our listener count, and Sweet Mark, who at night turns into a raccoon and rubbages through your garbage cans, and Dr. Bronner's peppermint shampoo. As always, I'm Nelson with...
And I'm lost.
And our guest this evening is...
Matthew.
Hey, yay!
Welcome, yay!
Welcome.
Yeah, another week where Mark is a little indisposed, but
Yeah.
You got two of us, your favorite hosts.
Yeah. 2 out of 4.
Funny, because I was going to say that, and it's less awkward now that Mark
Hell yeah.
There's nothing that a millennial can be if not self-deprecating. We know.
Yeah, I'm just glad we're indoors because it's hot outside. It is way too hot. And we were talking before we recorded with Matthew because we're both in the South that just like it is just horribly hot. It is just way too hot. Kai, I know you're in the UK, so I don't know if it's hot there, but here it's just absolutely disgustingly hot. So yeah, Kai's smart. Kai got out as soon as Kai was like, bye, Florida. I'm gone.
good for him.
Yay, Kai, you did it.
It's literally been for the last 10 days or so about 70 degrees, overcast, and windy. Right? I moved out of Florida for this. I couldn't be happier, honestly. This is great. Now, watch me eat my words because in the middle of summer, it'll be like 100 degrees and people are going to be dropping like flies in London again. But yeah, this is great for now.
And then it'll be raining, just raining every day.
Especially when my dad messages me like once a week saying, oh, the air conditioner stopped working. Like, oh, yeah. That's why I don't live in Florida anymore.
God. Oh, man. Anyway. Yeah, so I've been staying indoors. I need to find someone with a pool because I want to go swimming, but I don't know anyone with a pool. And I need to do yard work, but I don't want to do yard work because it's like 107 degrees outside. And unfortunately, my mom, she tans really well because she's 100% Italian, and I got the pale gene, so I burn, and it's great. I feel so great that I do not tan. My mom gets very tan and I burn. I was like, thanks, oh well. Anyway, y'all, so this is the highly anticipated episode about Cop City. We've had a lot of people ask, especially throughout the United States, like, what is Cop City? What is going on? What the hell is going on in Atlanta? There's so much going on, changes every day. So with us is Matthew, is going to talk to us about it. Someone on the ground there that knows what's going on and can weed through a lot of the information and even disinformation that apparently has been going on, so we can get like an actual perspective, like what the city of Atlanta is doing. So Matthew, real quick, you're with the Beloved community. Could you just tell us a little bit about your organization and what y'all are doing?
Right. This was an organization that was created to resource and support people that are doing the work. So that means supporting organizers and activists to develop projects and plans that are cultivating the world that they want to see, especially in the struggle that we are in. It's our job to make sure that people feel safe, secure, and their basic needs are met as best as possible. While they're doing the work of resisting a project that is not good for the city of Atlanta, but rather Atlanta's private interests, right? The international corporations that I would call outside agitators first proposed the militarized police training facility built by the Atlanta Police Foundation in 2017. Um, People noted then that it was a crazy idea. It was right after the Atlanta Police Foundation implemented what's called Operation Shield. And this was one of the ways they blanketed Atlanta with surveillance equipment, making it the most surveilled city in the country. Um, and then they proposed this facility, which people thought was pretty wild. And in Atlanta's city plan, they had uh, pledged to make the old Atlanta prison farm site a public park. To give a little bit of background about this land that we're talking about, in 1830, this land was taken from the Muskogee people that initially occupied this land for thousands upon thousands of years, made highways, infrastructure, to trade, to work together and collaborate. Um, and it was taken in 1830. Um, and many of those folks had not returned to that land until 2021. From that point, it became a plantation uh, where we know that there are bodies of enslaved African people who were brought to this land to work it without reaping any of the benefits. Um, After the emancipation, this place was the Atlanta Prison Farm. And the Atlanta Prison Farm was a place where people were held for basically being black in public. So if that was a max, we're talking public intoxication, loitering, things of that nature. Essentially, people were sent here to work the farms for free for the rest of the Atlanta prison system. And it persisted in this way until the 1990s. Records get sparse after the 1970s, but we know that it was shut down because of the amount of people that were poisoned there, because of how they stewarded the land. So then, at this point, it's been overgrowth for the past 20 years. The first time that this land's known freedom in about 160 years. And now it's being turned into what would be the largest militarized police training facility anywhere in North America. Equipped with what would have been helipads, a mock city to practice urban warfare tactics against civilians. As we're seeing an increased disparity in wealth, Atlanta has the largest racial median income disparity of any major city in the country, despite being called the Black Mecca. And it's the most surveilled. And rather than what they are foreseeing as a future in which people may resist or demand more, whether that's striking, whether that's people doing civil disobedience, any manner of things is being criminalized and met with brute force here. And that's because people in power know that the conditions that they've created are a powder keg. But rather than fix those problems, their answer for everything is policing. And that's where we find ourselves. And that's why this is the line that we're drawing. This has to stop. Why on earth would we treat each other like this in one of the most advanced nations that have ever existed in the history of humankind? Maybe. We've done some pretty cool shit here, but we've used it for killing each other. What in God's name is on our minds? With how we could have redirected all of this human potential and how we could have created a world that's mutually beneficial for all those that we engage with. Why would we choose this? But for some reason, this particular issue that's brought together people that are involved in environmental racism, environmental degradation, and all manner of climate projects, whether it be pipelines or any manner of engagement, deforestation projects, or all of these people have a stake here in the blackest city in America, which is called the Black Mecca. And just outside this city, you had a land occupation after the electoral route failed us in 2021. Like, what we saw was about 70% of people calling in doing comment set a record for length. And we have the inverse correlation with the vote of city council. They voted 10-4, about 70% for this project that people spoke 70% against. It failed us. And so people occupy the forest. And then every now and then there might be a little bang bang, a little smash smash. And that was a better reflection of the will of the people than our elected officials in regard to slowing this project down. And now we've gotten to the point where we're talking civil dialogue. We've once again set 2 more records in regard to participation at City Hall. And people have persisted with direct action, such as the week of action, whether that is in regard to different actions that have been claimed in regard to this movement. That have slowed this project down and demonstrated that the police do not work for us, quite simply. And that's where we persist now. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. That covers the basics. Yes.
I did not know that the area that this proposed site the proposed site used to be that plantation. It sounds like an Angola situation, like in Louisiana, that it was basically they continued on the plantation system, and
yes,
that's I did not know that. That's crazy. Right. That's like it's like a slap in the face. It's like salt in the wound to build this complex on that land. It's just absolutely that's wild.
Right. I would call it tone deaf, but that would imply that they were listening.
Exactly. So right. So just to go back to the beginning. So this training center, Cop City, was it proposed $96 million to build something along that line? Like you said, in a city that has extreme income disparity. But so the Atlanta Police Foundation and $96 million, and was this sort of like rushed through the city council? It sounded, from what I gathered, from what I saw, like when they were proposing this, like nobody really knew what was happening. It kind of like showed up on the agenda of city council. No one really kind of understood what it was, and they were just like, "Yeah, we're gonna do it." So, could you just take us back to the beginning of like a little bit more like in depth, like how this came to be? Because it sounds the entire thing is shady, obviously, but it's just like shadiness from like start to finish, and it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, I left out some key stuff there.
Let's go.
So this wasn't supposed to be a thing at all. It was initially, I think, introduced as a $10 a year lease on some, land that we're not really using. No big deal. That the city of Atlanta owns an unincorporated DeKalb for $10 a year to create the Institute for Social Justice.
I'm sorry. I remember hearing that name and thinking like that is the most that is peak. I don't know what to go to be like this, what amounts to an urban training center for police to conduct literally urban warfare on civilians. We're gonna call it the Institution for Social Justice or whatever. It's just like you gotta be. I was
Oh
like,
my
I thought
God.
it was a
Okay, all
joke.
right, there's
I
more.
thought it was a
There's
joke.
more.
I literally thought it was a joke when someone said it.
There's more.
Oh God.
I wish that I had it because nobody believes me unless they've seen it. But the first video of it was invoking King. They were like, in honor of Martin Luther King, in pursuit of a stronger system of social justice and training for our law enforcement. Like, and then they're just like showing like computerized footage of like fucking. Can I say?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, fuck it. Nah,
But
that needs a fuck because like I just think like I was like, are you serious? I want to be like I've listened and read the "I Have a Dream" speech. Nothing in there says I have a dream that one day $96 million will be given to cops. Like get the fuck out of here.
I missed it. I missed it.
I missed that's the edited part. That's the part they don't want you to know.
That's what they don't want you to know. Right, right, right.
Stay woke.
Like, and so it's just surreal. Like it's one of the funniest things that I saw, but also infuriating.
Yeah.
But I was just like, holy shit, they really went for it. But then we called them out. Like this movement, like was really built from the ground up because somebody was sleuthing through some shit and just happened to stumble upon this and try to figure out what in the hell it was. And that was when we started in the spring of 2021. And it was an amalgam of different organizations that wanted to stop Cop City. And when that happened, because another thing to note was it was crazy in 2017, but in 2021, after the uprisings, it was pushed back to the fore. And it was going to be done by Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms right before she left office. Then we called her. Now, I know that she resigned, or said, not resigned, but said that she wasn't running for a second term, which is basically like resigning if you're mayor of Atlanta, honestly, unless you really sucked. But anyhow, and so she resigned shortly after that, or I mean, said that she was going to be headed up shortly after that. And then we really pressed this fight from that time, April 2021 to September. And then you had an occupation shortly thereafter. So that's the little gap of this struggle that I left out earlier. Because it was supposed to be a public park. That was in the city's master plan. And then they pushed it again in 2021 after the uprisings.
So it went from trying to, it seems like going the route like getting the mayor and the city council like, hey, can we like stop this? And then COVID and the uprisings, and then we start going into more of the direct action because obviously like we've all seen the videos of like the heavy equipment going in. They're like, we're gonna bulldoze this area like it's getting built. And so we get more into the direct action and the occupation of the forest. I don't want to get their name wrong, but would you talk about the activist that was killed by the police and what all happened in that situation? Because there's been a lot of stuff that has come out afterwards. There's like the cops lied about everything from the weapons involved to what happened to just everything after the autopsies and everything came out, that it was basically they executed this person.
So occupation starts fall 2021. Um, the occupation was going for over a year. And it would just be kind of a back and forth, the police raid, few people get popped. And we go to jail. I mean, nothing crazy, right? I mean, and then in December, uh, you get the first people that are charged with domestic terrorism charges. And we're talking about people that are being shot with rubber bullets, have pepper spray balls, thrown at them, shot at them, etc. And they're getting yanked out of trees forcibly, then being charged with domestic terrorism. Right? There's people saying that people threw things at them. They haven't been able to produce any evidence that indicates that. And they were charged with domestic terrorism. In December, you had a couple of raids back to back. And then, once again in January, there was another major raid. And on one of those days, we knew that someone was shot. And so that night, it was strange because we knew that someone was killed. It had not been made clear who yet. And so we were in a very strange place where every person that you saw, you were relieved. But on the flip side of that, you were starting to winnow down to who it was. And I hope that nobody else has to grieve like that. For friends and people that they hold close, because it's a very strange fit. But here we are. And so a few days after, and then we found out the day after, officially, that it was Tortuguita. Very beautiful soul that had so much to give to the world and had already given to the world. One of the great blessings of this movement has been Bautista in Daniel as well as Pedro. They've, just become so much like family and caring for as, siblings and the mother of Tortuguita. And the movement's built since. A few days after, there was an action where a few people were, about 6 people were arrested at the action, where there was a cop car burned. There was some bang bang, smash smash on places associated with the Atlantic Police Foundation on this project. And people were just grabbed at random, of course. And then there was what happened on March 5th, where people were also, taken by the police. So all in total, about 3.5 dozen people have domestic terrorism charges. And there's not one bruise on any officer that could be substantiated from us. We knew that they were lying about Tortuguita from the jump. They had 57 gunshot wounds, barely flecks of gunpowder on their hands, and they said that they shot first. It didn't add up. We knew it was a lie. They changed their story in the first 2 hours. Like we saw it all, and nobody was listening. Let me not say that, but rather it hadn't gotten on people's radar yet, or it was easy to dismiss them as some crazy kids in a forest. But it's come with great cost. But there is a lot more public outcry, which is, some shield, but it's pretty wild out here. These cops are wild.
The excuse me, the domestic terrorist charges, that was something that I think a lot of people were shocked by, because that hadn't necessarily been a thing that we were used to until until this. And could you talk more about like the people who were charged with the domestic terrorist charges, and like have the charges been dropped? Have they been lowered from domestic terrorism? Because that's a huge, people don't realize that that's a huge federal thing. Like that, you're looking at like upwards of life in prison. It's not something to play around with, and for them to throw out domestic terrorist charges on people, that's a game changer. That's something that you don't
Right.
see. That's something that's usually reserved for people like Ted Kaczynski, right? And what's his face, the dude who blew up in Oklahoma City, right? So that's pretty wild. Usually it's white men with bombs that get charged with that, not people trying to defend a forest.
Right, exactly. This was the first time that an environmental activist was murdered by law enforcement. However, it's not the first time that, folks have been met with significant repression. The Green Scare was definitely a thing. Um, and so I guess this is our particular movement is kind of on that continuum. The arrests have been so arbitrary, and it's been so hard for them to tie anyone to anything in any meaningful way that they're literally just grabbing bodies and fucking people's lives up. Uh, and that's just what they've done. I mean, one thing that I noticed in terms of the arrests, they skewed a lot more film folk and like smaller frame folk because they're literally just nabbing people, right? Like it's like really just going for targets to get bodies and hoping that somebody says something. I mean, it is what it is. But anyhow, like that's how the arrests have skewed. Uh, I am a part of the Faith Coalition as well. And one of the people that was arrested that day, I in fact saw um, when Victor was arrested. And we were able to go visit Victor. And that was on what, last Thursday during the week of action. And Victor's the only person that's still held in custody from March 5th. And Victor, I guess, was in good standing, even with the very, messed up nature of the, I'm trying to say the F word too much. The messed up nature of the immigration system.
Mm-hmm.
Victor's legal status is now in jeopardy because of these charges themselves, right? And there is a system in the detention center that Victor was being held in that separates blue shirts from red shirts. And blue shirts are like just like chill, maybe suspended license, some bullshit, like some maybe felonies, and then like red shirts are like people that are just like, on one, like murders, like major drug trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. And Victor got the red shirt just because of these charges themselves and being an activist. But what's kept Victor safe, especially as Victor has expressed, because he does get so much mail and support from the folk, and that means a lot, right? And so the repression has been bad, but we've been fairly good at getting our people the fuck out. And I'm proud of that. And that's one of the reasons that they also came into the House of the Bail Fund with a SWAT team, knocked in the door. Wait. Knocked in the door and raided them with guns out for what they called charity fraud. So they were essentially saying, because they paid their Wi-Fi bill and reimbursed themselves for some like outdoor equipment, that they were money laundering as a nonprofit that they were running from their house, paying their Wi-Fi bill from the nonprofit that they run at their house They were charged with charity fraud, but then had a SWAT team. When have you heard of charity fraud that brings a SWAT team? This is insane. And like, this is our day-to-day life right now. Sorry to yell, but
No,
it's
I mean, no,
nuts.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's so, to me, that's so nefarious that they did that. Because they like trying to say they don't even do this to like mafia family. Like they don't do this to like drug traffickers and the mafia, like money, like real RICO money laundering, racketeering stuff. They literally, I remember seeing, I think we all saw the video on Twitter and other social media platforms, like SWAT teams busting through the door of a bail fund. And like in the back of my mind, like there's been like a few people that have, said like, are you going to do an episode on Cop City? Because we are in the South and there's a lot of quote unquote Yankee podcasts that have been doing stuff about Cop City. And I was just like, I really want somebody like that's on the ground to talk about it. But I know people are afraid to reach out. But then also I was thinking like these people who have like the people were saying like, we talk, etc. like on here and this. And I was just like, it got to the point where I was just like, it's getting so out of hand that like people in the back of my mind, I was like, people who have the bail fund in their bios, like if you're really worried about like scrutiny, security, I was just like, y'all, they're gonna start coming after people funding this. Like they're gonna try and cut it off at its source. And lo and behold, they go after the bail fund. And I'm just like, I was like, when I think in everyone, the responses when we saw the SWAT team roll up to that house and bust through the door. And the whole thing on Netflix with Waco is big on Netflix now, but like just that style, just rolling up battering rams, busting in to people literally raising money to help people get out of jail, which we could probably rant about the bail system and how fucked up it is on another episode. But to then charge them with charity fraud and money laundering and like high charges, like these are really fucked up, insane. This is RICO statute shit. So like you're looking at 25 to life for this sort of thing. They like John Gotti was in prison for this shit, right? So like, how are you gonna fucking charge fucking people running a charity like a bail fund? The same person, the Teflon Don, one of the most powerful men in the New York crime families. Like, what the fuck? So like that was just utterly insane and just really nefarious that they fucking did that shit. And so I guess the next, like, if you want, like, obviously, if there's more into that, please be my go on. But like, there was also something where even the judge, to an extent, was just like, "What the fuck are y'all doing?" Like to the cops, they were just like,
"Yeah, it's given fascist states."
Exactly. Yeah, fascism and diet fascism.
Right. I mean, that was okay. So, fun fact.
Oh God.
Lawyer for the Atlanta Solidarity Fund was the law professor of the prosecutor in that particular hearing, which would explain why he got schooled.
No! Whoa! Bwah, bwah, bwah. That was the most epic dad joke ever.
On the older side of people that do this shit now.
So what happened with the bail hearing? When they actually were brought up and they were just like, hey, this is what was it something like they didn't even know like what they were being charged with? There's like some bunch of just bullshit was happening in that whole hearing.
Like, I mean, there was some camping equipment that was reimbursed by the phone. I think that it was an internet bill from their house. That's like a community house that's been serving literally. They were running one of, I think, the most efficient food distribution program during COVID. I volunteered for it. That was how I first got to, know folks. And that was during COVID when everybody else was shut down, spraying their groceries and just doing weird shit, like walking backwards through thresholds to keep the COVID off of them. And
I'm just running through my mind all the crazy shit we saw.
all the crazy shit we believe. They were like, I mean, dropping, stuff off with donated food, had like a, little Slack that we like ran the stuff off of. And, and also on the flip side, they supported people that, got arrested during protests and made sure that people were able to get out of jail, even if they were broke, but they were protesting, standing up for something. That they could get out of jail and not be like in debt or stuck. So I mean, it means it's everything in regard to any history that Atlanta claims in civil rights, and creating that space where like young Black kids could protest, stand up for something, get arrested and profiled by the Cubs, and not be stuck there. So that means something. And they did that shit indiscriminately, just really watching out for folks. And that is the type of community resource that they had been. So the outcry was significant. The fact that the charges were so damn silly, like running Wi-Fi from your house for a build. I mean, like for multiple, different efforts that literally build community. Like Marlon's in rap videos from people that have grown up around them. Like they're really a part of the community and take care of people. They live into their values. I like to say this, and it might make them upset, but the person, Adele, that was arrested is the best Christian I know, and I'm ordained. And I, said that, for quite some time in terms of just watching out for people and, really creating space for people in the community. And so to arrest them was just such an outrage. And, folks really stood up for us. But I mean, really, there's a lot of pushback against this project. So, the ground that we've been fighting on has been shifting. Because also, we had those two instances where we set records for showing up at City Council on May 15th and June 5th. So, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that because my next question. So then the last thing that I saw was you had the people show up to the city council meeting. Thousands, it seems like, just more so than shows up to any city council meeting I've ever been to. And just continuously, the overwhelming majority was like, we don't want this to be built. This is bad. Like, you even had EMS folks get up there and be like, this is not going to help, like ambulance,
right?
EMS in general. It's just going to help cops. Like, nobody wants this. It was like the overwhelming majority is like, hey, fuck this project. We don't want it. Please stop it. And the city council votes 11-4, in favor of it, even after all this time, everyone's coming out and saying hey, no, we don't want it.
I mean, so for people who don't believe in electoral politics at all, and the last vote in 2021, after we had a record-setting amount of public comment, and they voted 10-4, okay? The people said, the system doesn't work, yada, yada. Now then, after that, we set a record for people showing up to city council, then do it again with even more people at the following meeting, 3 weeks later. And the only difference was there was a person who had taken time off when they had a newly born baby, Amir Faroqi. And Amir Faroqi came back almost 2 years later to add on to the stupid votes that nobody wanted for this project. So it's 11. What do you tell people that tell you that there's no other way besides very direct action in regard to stopping the project? Like, what can you reasonably tell them? I don't know. And that's where we're at now.
There was one more thing. Because you touched on something that I've tried to explain to people a lot, and I'm glad you said what you said. But isn't like a referendum, like a ballot measure they got the signatures or they needed more signatures, and then they pulled the same fuck shit that they always do, especially if you try to run as an independent, like, oh, we can't verify all these signatures. And they were like, finally, I don't know, maybe wrong. They finally say that, okay, it's verified and it will be on the ballot now. So like, where are we at? I guess. No. Oh, okay. They pulled the fuck shit. All right, great. Yay, democracy.
They came out swinging with the fuck shit. So first, we apply, and they have a maximum of 7 days before they return the petition to you to let you know what you've done wrong. And they waited the 7 days possible. Then they were like, oh yeah, you left this line off at the bottom. And then folks returned it, and then they were stalling. People started to apply pressure in regard to, the law of, hey, you can't keep holding this. So they turned it back in, and then they come back with all these other errors that they never mentioned before the first time. And so people going through that, and then they resubmitted it. And now it is June 16th, I believe. And Andre Dickens, with this being one of the blackest cities in America, giving everybody the day off early on the Friday before Juneteenth. These people are cartoonishly evil.
Yes. Just twirling the mustache. Like, yeah, it reminds me of that. It reminds me of that Boondocks episode with BET. It's just like, yeah.
Like, God damn.
Like, you can't script this. You can't write. You couldn't write this. This is what is happening.
Who could write?
I feel you on the signatures and everything, because I helped someone try to run as an independent candidate, and I don't know about Georgia, but Alabama has one of the strictest voter access, like ballot access laws.
Oh yeah,
it's just like they're like, oh, after like the how many thousands, 10,000, whatever signatures, they're like, oh, this one signature, you can't verify that. Go fuck yourself. It's impossible. It's impossible.
So, all right, so here's the deal. Here you have to make sure that every person that you get to sign was a registered voter in the city of Atlanta for the last municipal election. That was in 2021. Okay. That also still lives directly in the city limits. Now, the people whose homes are juxtaposed to this facility cannot vote because it's an unincorporated DeKalb, which part of Atlanta, for some reason or another, is in, while the other part is in Fulton County.
I have heartburn listening to this.
It's not in the city limits of Atlanta, so they can't vote. So fuck them.
Once again, your people should have just beheaded Columbus.
Right. No, not that. They got fucking run out in 1830. That is when the Indian Removal Act happened.
Yeah. God damn it. We did talk about that. Oh, fuck.
That's fair.
Oh my God.
Like there was no decapitation happening then. They were trying to use the same system that ended up booting them out. Remember the whole thing that we went through on that?
God damn it.
They're
Why
like,
is history so fucked
Indians aren't considered people under the law, but we'll mess them around until we actually listen to this case, and then we go, we're just gonna kick them out anyway. That was the beginning of the Trail of Tears in 1830. So our hands are clean because most of them are dead. So
I feel like that sometimes.
God damn it. And then Matthew, you hit the nail on the head. Something I've like tried to like drill in to people, especially that aren't like in this, like well, I don't like to talk bad about the South to people who are not from the South, because like really my biggest pet peeve is quote unquote Yankees like saying like blah 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 blah. I'm like, calm down, Boston. When did you integrate your schools? So like the whole, I guess like what we touched on, like Atlanta itself is like the big blue dot in Georgia, and it's a democratically, it's a Democrat run city. The outlying counties, like it's that, but you still have this, excuse me, this, you still have the problem with income inequality and racism and police brutality. And I think that is just like that is all coming together within this, like in Cop City. And it's, I think, mind boggling to people that, you know, you expect this in like, you know, from Republican politicians, but the fact that I would say that I'm guessing like every politician involved is either, you know, independent but liberal or Democrat. And it's they're doing the same shit that they complain that Republicans do, but then they're literally doing the same shit, if not worse. So it's just it's something that I've tried to talk to people about and been like, hey, you know, the Democratic Party isn't necessarily going to save you. Like when push comes to shove, they'll be just as bad, if not worse, than the Republicans. And I think that we're seeing that with Cop City, it seems like.
Yeah, you know, fascism is always on the table when you have a megalomaniac who feels like their power is under threat. And you have many a megalomaniac in Atlanta, Georgia, right? Especially because of the tax incentives and ways in which people have just leveraged the system and, you know, bought out politicians for pennies on the dollar to amass wealth and curb all liabilities for themselves. And those are instanched interests. Like, and this is something I think that we have to engage with, like the nuances of, you know, young black kids getting pigeonholed into JROTC from the time. I mean, this is something that the New York Times has pointed out, probably like last fall. But anyhow, and then in addition to that, you have this like pipeline of, you know, military to police, and a lot of these kids never had a fair shake. And this ends up being the front line, you know, for like further militarized policing and corporate interests and protecting private interests over people. Like, when do you see the police tanks except for like mass demonstrations? When else would they bring out tanks? And so, like, that's where we find ourselves. And I think that it's important to note that this is a, you know, moral crisis, and all of us are stuck in a system where just like to have what decent paying jobs were turned against each other. I mean, shit, same as crack, right? Like, it is what it is. But that's where we're at now in regards to like law enforcement in Atlanta, frankly.
You brought up a good point, or I bring this up, and I'm glad that you're on, because I wanted to ask you this specifically. I don't think it was a TikTok I saw from a mutual of mine that lives in Portland, and I think it was a black pastor was talking about something and said, you know, the you know, we will overcome, God help us, like just get, it was something like a progressive movement. It was something that, you know, as a Southerner, if you're in the South, you know, regardless of like what, like your politics, that religion does play a role in a lot of movements, whether they be, you know, bad ones or whether they be good ones. And this person that, you know, was in Portland, wasn't from the South, was like, oh, you lost me when you mentioned God. And you brought up earlier that one of the people that, you know, that was incarcerated was, you know, probably one of the best model Christians you could think of, even better than yourself, who's ordained. Like, I was wondering, like, as a pastor, as someone who's involved in the Stop Cop City movement, as someone who's involved in progressive politics, left leaning politics, it seems, and in activism work, how does your faith play into that? Into how is that different than when you see like reactionaries playing into their faith for their movements.
Right. Like a lot of what people perceive Christianity to be is white nationalism um, and ritual mixed together, uh, saying words from the, you know, uh, Old and New Testament of the Holy Bible, or the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. Uh, but if you read what it says, in regard to different aspects of religion, I mean, you have God even explicitly talking about how high the interest rates are at like 1% uh, per month. Uh, I mean, credit cards are damn near double that, right? So it's just, these are the things that they don't bring up. Jesus saying, the eye of the needle. I mean, well, let me not just like assume everybody knows that, which is bullshit, right? But rather, when Jesus says that it is easier for a camel to walk through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Like, we leave this stuff out. But what's more important is right before that, or right after that, the disciples said, but then who can be saved? Right? And what that meant was that their society was bent towards just assuming that all those that were rich were inherently blessed by God. And so the concept that if they can't enter into heaven, who can, is what's prevalent under that, right? And we have a similar culture today, right? Where it's, the culture's been warped in such a way that we assume that we should be protecting the interests of the wealthy who have an unfathomable amount of money, right? If you made $100,000 for 10,000 years without paying any tax and not spending one dime, you would have $1 billion. Like, why do you need that much money? Like, why would you need that? Like, you would have $800 million when you met Jesus. Like, come on. Then go do $1 billion slowly. That's nuts. You don't need that much money. And that's only $1 billion. There are people with like approaching 200 of those billions. And there are people starving. Like, that's crazy. Why do we let that happen? So, I mean, I'm obviously passionate about this, but this is literally absurd. But we've gotten so used to people developing market logic everywhere we go, and like shaping the conversation in such a way that it shuts off like certain ways that we think of how to be as, people and actually care for one another and what that looks like.
Yeah.
At least what the city of Atlanta will do is spend like almost $70 million to build a massive police training facility, so that like when the people who can't afford food realize that that's the reason we have a bunch of people with guns who are ready to prevent those people from taking what they need to survive. So great job, city of Atlanta there.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's like to say. Oh, right on.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that this was Oren. Great intro, Oren. And as well as Janaki and Zoe from the Student Coalition that are bottom lining a lot of the work that we'll be doing. I would love to hear them speak about some of the stuff that they're doing, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's totally fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because one thing that we've been focused on is building out the movement and changing the motivation.
Yeah, for sure. So if you guys want to come in closer and introduce yourselves and talk about the Student Coalition, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I'm Oren.
Sorry, I think this is all our first time doing this, so we
It's
might
all
all
good.
get used to this. Yeah. But I'm Oren. This is
I'm Janaki.
I'm Zoe.
so we are all Atlanta students, and Zoe and I are from the Atlanta area. But we're all here over the summer organizing in the movement as well, especially from the perspective of like what it is that students can bring to this movement. And so we formed kind of like a multi-school coalition with all of the different schools in Atlanta back in like March of this year. And we've been doing a lot of cool things like we did student occupations in May, where at Emory and Georgia Tech, we occupied spaces on our campus as a way of reclaiming green space that had been taken when the forest defenders had been kicked out of the forest. And the other schools in Atlanta were able to support. So those are kinds of the things that we've been thinking about and doing in the movement.
That's awesome. Like, I guess real quick, like, what do you like? What are some more like programs, or what do you guys hope to accomplish and bring to the forefront? Like, I mean, I don't consider myself old, but I remember like
You are.
I know. I remember being young and going to, like, Occupy Wall Street, for an example, and like we thought that we could do this, this, and this. So like, what do you guys, what do y'all hope to accomplish? Like, what are your goals?
I just want to mass mobilize students. That's like my biggest goal. Like, I just want a large group of students available to do large demonstrations.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I agree. It's really about like harnessing the energy that exists amongst like student populations and really putting that towards I think like a multitude of causes, right? I'm sure you guys have discussed before we came here how like intersectional of a movement this is and how many different spaces that this touches. So I think like we talk a lot about how there's room for everybody in this and how we just like I think we kind of view our job as to like take that energy and connect people with the people in the spaces and the things that they need to do what they want to do. I also think like something we're talking about a lot is the role that universities play as institutions in this like system of capitalism and oppression, and what it looks like for us as students as like the primary consumers of the university to like radically reimagine that space and that structure in order to align the institutions that supposedly represent us more clearly with what we actually believe and want to see. And then I think lastly, yeah, just like as students, we're in this like huge position of privilege and have a lot of, I think we have a lot of power and we have a lot of moves that we can make. And so I think like lending as much as our support, especially for those of us that aren't permanent residents of Atlanta, lending our time and our voices and our labor to the area that we're occupying and the space that we're a part of right now. I think that's my perspective.
Like in a lot of ways, the student groups are not just their own distinct groups in the movement, but they are also kind of like a replication of all of these different people who are involved in the movement. And so there are a lot of really cool ways that we can plug in, and we can also kind of harness the power that student movements have had historically to help this one. But I think also there's just like a huge aspect of people love to use us politically for their own gain. So like Andre Dickens earlier this year at the State of the City address declared this the year of the youth. He was like, oh, I'm going to do everything for the youth this year. It's going to be great. And he had this, I think like 15 or 16-year-old kid stand up. And he told this story about how this kid was selling water bottles on the street and how he had now instead gotten the kid out of trouble and was now working for the city instead, selling water bottles for the city for what I don't remember the exact amount, but was below a living wage in Atlanta. And it's like, well, I'm sure that this person was enforced to stop selling water bottles the way they were and work for you through the police, right? Because that's kind of the stick that's making this person listen to you. But second, like the youth of the city have become really mobilized against Cop City. and against these kinds of policies that are very exploitative. Like, why is it that this person who's 15 or 16 is being forced to work for the city instead of being empowered to do after school activities or, whatever it is that that person actually wants to do? It's because of the massive wealth inequality that we have in the city. And the thing that we're doing, instead of actually fixing that wealth inequality so that the people who are going to be in the positions that we're in 2 years from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now can actually best prepare themselves for what it is that we're doing right now, is we're just throwing money at the cops so that when these people step out of line, they can just be forced back in. And it was like, really, when we did the student occupation, for example, at Emory, we were kicked off our quad by about 20 Atlanta police officers. This was like not the Emory police. This was the Atlanta police who came and kicked us off campus. So this is the kind of thing that we're dealing with.
You brought up student-led movements in the past, and I think that with a lot of people that that just haven't looked at movements in other countries, they've always been, especially in the latter half of the 20th century, like student-led movements. Especially a lot of anti-colonial movements have been student-led movements. But we haven't. We see it in the United States, but it's always it gets tampered out. Very quickly. It loses steam pretty quickly. What have y'all taken from, I guess, past student movements, and how do y'all plan to incorporate that into this, like the Stop Cop City stuff? Like, I guess, what have we learned from the past? Because I will say, even as a millennial, it does seem like Gen Z is doing the right thing. It's just like, yeah, like Gen X and boomers, like, to us, we're like, stop, you stupid kids. But it's just like, we're just like y'all are doing stuff that I wish that like we would have done. And it's just like, because I thinking back at like Occupy Wall Street and a bunch of other stuff, it's like we haven't seen, like, as a millennial, I just remember like the Stop the Iraq War movement and things like that, and how like just powerful like we felt, and then it just died, right? And like seeing y'all really step up and doing stuff that like we couldn't even think of when we were younger, it's heartwarming, and I really do. I love it. Like, it's great. I'm really happy for y'all. So I guess, like, what do you see from the past, stuff that you all can learn, that y'all have learned from, to really bring to the Stop Cop City movement? Like, what are y'all hopes, and like what do y'all think, like, going forward, to stop this $96 million fascist training center? Like, what do y'all think about, like, what's the next step?
I mean, I think the two things that come to my mind, but I'd be really interested to hear what you guys have to say as well, is that I think this is like, the movement is very focused on Cop City, but it's much bigger than Cop City.
Yeah.
And so I think that something that comes up a lot in our conversations is always making sure that the energy that we're harnessing is like accessible to people, making sure that any student, regardless of identity or anything like that, feels comfortable coming into our space, but also that once we've won this fight, that we can take this energy and this momentum and carry it on to the larger forces that are at play. Because none of us who are, I think, consistently organizing have said anything other than that we want to make sure that we are still doing this after we've beaten Cop City. And I think the other thing that's really important to keep in mind is, at least for myself, but like, we are actually students. And so the first thing I did when I started organizing the movement was I went out and found non-students who could actually kind of mentor me, because we don't have people at our institutions who can teach us how to fight our institutions and how to fight the things that our institutions have very, very deep financial connections to. And so I think the big thing, a really big thing for me, has been just remembering actually how little it is that we know, and how much it is that I have to learn from the other people in the movement, especially who've been, organizing around this for 2 years, or organizing in this way for 10 years, and making sure that I can just learn as much as I can from those people.
I think I'm going to add on to both of those things. I think for me, particularly as a student coming from outside of Atlanta, I think it's really easy to come into a new space and really kind of like think, okay, well, I know what the issue is, and I know what needs to be done, and I'm gonna, start this and start that. And I think a lot of the times, and this is like, I think something that I see a lot in organizing as a whole, that is a lot of the times our downfall is like a failure to really take advantage of the existing like work that's being done and the existing networks and the existing community. And so I think within student movements, that's particularly important because there are so many people who come from outside like the most directly impacted communities. And also because like as students, there's a lot of people who sort of come in and out, and there's a lot of different levels of investment and commitment and ability. And so I think like being very cognizant of all of the support and work that is already there, and thinking about like how you can contribute to that, how you fit into that, how you can build on that, is something that is really important in terms of efficacy. And it's also just it makes our job easier. And so I think that goes along with really like seeking out mentors, and sort of checking yourself on like what you think you know. And then in terms of what's the first thing you said?
Oh, that the movement is bigger than
Yeah, I think like something we've been talking about a lot is not just making sure that like there's longevity to our work. Like, I mean, we definitely want to be thinking like 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead. Because I think when you look historically at student movements or any movements, it's at the end of the day, it's long work. And you harness the energy for moments and you celebrate moments, but having that long-term perspective is important. I also think like we talk so much about how much work there is to do, and particularly about how much like generative work there is to do, and how much like if we're talking in the context of abolition, right, that's just as much creating better and supportive and community-centered systems as it is getting rid of the harmful, oppressive, capitalistic systems. And so what are we doing on that front, right? How are we building each other up, supporting each other, creating these really uplifting frameworks at the same time as we're trying to get rid of what's hurting us? And I think that's also like, that touches on what you've been talking about that creates more space to bring more people in. If there's, you know, marginalized students who aren't necessarily safe or comfortable engaging in like arrestable actions, then there's space, right? It makes everything that we do that much more inclusive and allows us to bring in so many more people and so many more perspectives. And I think that's something that that's a lot of the work of other student movements that we overlook, because it's not as sexy as the protests, it's not as exciting, nobody writes about it. And so it's almost impossible to know about if you don't like really do a lot of digging. So
yeah, I I got nothing, because that's perfect. I think that's a huge, I think y'all hit the nail on the head with the like spreading it out. It's like, it's not, you're right, it's not just about Cop City. Cop City is just one thing, but there's so many things that go into Cop City, and there's so many other problems, and it's just that's just the physical amalgamation of all of it. It's like Cop City also represents racism, income inequality, just capitalism, like police brutality, all of it. It's like, it's this monster, that is being built, that represents like everything wrong with this country. And I hope that we can stop it. But like you said, it doesn't just stop with Cop City. Like, if this Cop City fails, the system is going to come back with an even bigger, stronger one that is going to be like its own walled in, massive, dystopian, whatever, God knows what they can come up with, right? So it's going to be like Escape from, like, I'm just going to go way back. It's going to be like Escape from Los Angeles, Escape from New York, like massive prison island, right? Matthew knows what I'm talking about. He remembers that movie. Kind of that movie. All the old people know that movie. But yeah, it's just, it doesn't just stop with this. It's like going back to, you know, what I was talking about. It's like, it didn't stop with it didn't stop with the Iraq War. Like it just kept, the system kept going. And unless we come together, unless we really try to stop everything, and that you just can't cut off one head of the snake and let the other ones flourish, right? As the metaphor goes. It's like you have to destroy it at its source. And if we stop Cop City, great. That's awesome. That is a win. But something bigger and worse is going to come back in its place. It's just like how Matthew said, like that spot of land has so much history to it. Like it one is a plantation and then a prison plantation. And that stopped. And then that stopped. And then it was peaceful. And then Cop City. So what's coming after Cop City is going to be worse than what we've seen before, unless we put a stop to it completely and say that this will not stand. So I really like how y'all framed it in that it's not just one thing, it's multiple things. And I think that's a big lesson to take from past movements that focus on singular issues, where it has to be like the movements have to be multi-tenancy, they have to be intersectional, they have to focus on not just one particular problem, but what causes Cop City. What is the root of Cop City? And I think we all know, like, capitalism, colonialism, the United States, etc., settler colonialism. But like, I think what you all said was beautiful. And as somebody, and I don't want to speak for Kai, but I know we've both been active in movements and protests our entire lives, and it's great to see young folks stepping up and doing it. It seems like better than what we did. So you got these old millennial support. We're not going to be like the boomers. I just keep thinking
you always say, I don't want to speak for Kai when you say something positive. Like, no, I don't want to speak for her when I'm saying something really nice about these people. Thanks. I
love
know
you.
I don't talk a lot, but come on.
You're stoic. You're stoic, Kai.
Way to be stereotypical, Nelson.
I know,
Thanks. Right? Do you want me to sit here like this the entire? I'll wear my feathers next time, man.
I love you, Kai.
I think just like whenever we're talking about this, it's also important to keep in mind, like, the reason why it's so important to bring more people in is because, like, we are stronger when we're together, and we have been getting a lot stronger. And so, like, the flip side to, like, the Solidarity Fund getting arrested, for example, was more than 100 people showed up to a vigil at the jail. And a bunch of cops came out when we were playing music to look and see who was waving from their jail cells so they could go and punish those people. And a group of like 20 or 30 protesters, like, we started yelling at them and chased them back to a line of cops, who then had a confrontation with us, which ended in one of their bosses telling them to stand down. Like, so we are actually getting stronger. And right now we'll have like an event in a park where we'll hold a vigil for Tortuguita, who was killed in January, for example, and they feel the need to have 30 cops show up in that park during that time. So when we're starting, which I don't think is that far away, but when we're starting to turn out thousands of people, they're not going to be able to stop us, because we are, I think, actually being successful in bringing new people into these spaces.
That's so fucked up that they did that. It's just, it's this whole episode, like, I shouldn't be shocked at like everything I've heard, but like, it just, yeah. Anyway, there's a Phil Oakes song that's like running through my head about like student-led movements, and it's beautiful. I'll make it Mr. Speaker to put it on at the end, like, because like, we're not gonna have a problem with that for the audio stuff. But yeah, Kai, do you have anything you want to say, Kai? Before I
I find this really heartening to hear that, like what you were saying, with a lot of student-led movements that came earlier. So if we even go back to like the anti-Vietnam protests in the 60s and earlier than that, like, the problem when it came to student-led protests at that point was that you had people who were very privileged in the universities at that point. You had to be very privileged to be in the universities at that point. So they were disenfranchised as kids, kind of seen as kids and students. So what they said was just idealistic blather. But then you also had, like, it was only the things that they felt affected by that they decided to protest at that point. And I mean, this coming off the back of the ruling about affirmative action, ending affirmative action at this point. So like, hearing that, like, okay, so older student-led movements were hamstrung by X, Y, and Z, but it was also only the privileged people. And now, we've had what 3 decades, 4 decades of affirmative action, just long enough to start seeing, we're getting intersectional movements at this point. We've had, a few generations of students be brought into these institutions, and they're saying, hey, we need to change this, we need to change that. You're basically, brainwashing us into thinking that this is the only way that we can go, especially when you go into higher education. We can only go into higher education, and then we're hamstrung by, well, if we want to stay at our university, then we can't say what we actually want to say. Like there's so much that's like knotted into this. But now that we've had a few decades of students brought in saying, hey, there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to change, and there's a whole lot of power in these students who are here, who feel passionately about these things. And now they've just cut that off again with the end of affirmative action. And we could see this going kind of rolling back at some point, especially with the income inequality that is just skyrocketing. The older we get, it's getting worse. So you're going to have fewer lower income students. You're going to have fewer students of color entering these institutions, fewer students, a lot of like gender and sexuality differences coming into these universities. So there's a really real danger of that power getting stripped away by taking students out of these kind of melting pots that were and are used for indoctrination, but are also like these huge battery cells of passion and interest and intelligence and everybody coming together for one thing. So us just being like Nelson and I being a generation removed from that, when our college years would have been 10 years ago at this point. Don't look at me like that. We are old.
God damn it.
Just like these students now are experiencing something that is different than we even experienced about 10 years ago. And I think it's truthful to say that our movements weren't as successful, but it's also not really like our fault. It's not a fault that we had an entire system bent against us at that point. We were passionate about ending the Iraq War. We were passionate about Occupy Wall Street. There's an entire system that's against you. And the youth today that are students now, I see them better prepared for taking that on. I see you guys better prepared for taking that on than we were. And hearing that it's not the same old, generation against generation, that you can listen to people who came before you and you'll be open to people who come after you for this. It's creating a much stronger and better web of understanding of people. You have a platform that is, instead of every 4 years you have to make a new platform, you have a platform that's standing on the shoulders of people who came before you. So like, really, I applaud all of you. This is so great to hear. I love it when we have students come on. This is one of my favorite things. So thank you so much for coming on here and telling us what you're doing. And I really, really hope that this continues and you're going to win.
Yay. The kids are all right. All right, y'all. So real quick, just to wrap everything up, if we could start with y'all and then end with Matthew, just final thoughts on the movement, Cop City, and then most importantly, where can people find y'all if you have any social media presence, donate, etc. So the rest, it's up. I hand it over to y'all. Like I said, final thoughts, and then where can people find y'all?
Well, you can always get more information at the Defend Atlanta Forest IG page. I think that's Defend ATL Forest. And then also at defendtheatlantaforest.org. You also have the Stop Cop City page. And also you have Beloved Commune, as well as community movement builders that are local organizations that have been working in this fight, as well as a World Without Police. These are all like local organizations that have really been crucial in pushing this movement forward and just creating space for people to be uh, supported as they're going through this fight, because the repression is designed to be scary. Like that's their shtick, right? And when folks are persisting, even with all this public support that's quiet because they're being scared out of the fight, it's really important to have those organizations that have been on the ground. And yeah, thank you so much for reaching out to us, and we're glad to be on the show.
Yeah,
We'll
it was a pleasure to have you on. This is great. This is a lot of information. A lot of times, I'm not going to speak for Kai. I'll let Kai say it. She wants to. A lot of times, like the more informative episodes, whether the history or current events, leave me personally with just like a shit like feeling, like it just like fuck. It's just here we go again. Like it's just I feel like a defeated feeling, right? And with this episode, I don't have that feeling. I feel that like y'all, I don't want to say kids because y'all are, you kids implies like, immaturity and whatnot, but like y'all are doing great. I think that what the student movement is gives me a lot of hope that I haven't felt in a long time. Probably I haven't felt like that hope since I was at Zuccotti Park in New York City with Occupy Wall Street, thinking like, oh, this is great. And then it wasn't great. And it just got worse. And I was like, great, thanks. But Matthew, I think what you're doing is great and wonderful. I think what the Student Coalition is doing is wonderful. If you have any links, those organizations that you mentioned, if you just send them to me on Instagram, and then I'll put them in the show notes so people can find them. Kai, did you have anything you want to say before I do the outro? You haven't said shut up, Nelson, the entire episode.
I haven't had to tell you shut up, Nelson.
Oh, yeah, you said it.
No, I understand your feeling that like there's a lot of times where we've been part of movements. Like for me, the real big one was like No DAPL and moving on from there and watching the uprisings. I mean, even starting with like Ferguson and then going forward with how many like social uprisings there have been, anti-racist social uprisings since then, that like you feel like you're kind of beating yourself against a wall because even if you get a small win, it never seems to turn over into something that's actually systematic change, something that you can actually like feel. You can feel the change from it. But you always have to end up maintaining hope, because if you don't maintain that hope, if you don't feel like we're going to win this time, then that's how activist life turns real bitter and real dark real fast. And I think that maybe that's why student-led movements, like they're kind of popular, because you have reserves of hope that older people end up not having. But I think that watching that, you can feel reinvigorated and know that it's still entirely worthwhile to put yourself in the game, go out there and do something, make it happen. And if the only thing that you can do is support by sending money or making sure that links get shared, that's worthwhile too. Every part of it is worthwhile, but you have to stay to be part of it.
I just wanna add that, like, I mean, we're talking about how widespread this movement is, how long-term this work is, and how much space there is. And so I think, like, I mean, you want to talk about not just chopping off heads and really attacking this thing at the source, right? That means, like, doing the work within yourself and within your communities to really, like, undo all of the indoctrination that all of us have had surrounding these ideas of capitalism, colonialism, racism, like all of these things. And so I think, like, if you want to do something, go start having conversations, go start, doing the research so that you can be informed within yourself, so that you can inform others, and start thinking about, like, what are the institutions that are causing harm, right? If you're a university student, right, like, you hit the nail on the head. Like, these institutions are, like, designed to feed into and uphold this system of capitalism and to take these really amazing, really hopeful, radical spirits and just turn them out into more cogs in the capitalist system. So look at the spaces that you're in, look at what's causing harm, and look at what's missing, right? Like, look at all of the amazing, supportive, community-centered spaces that we've had throughout history that have been slowly stripped away. Things as simple as just like having a freaking kickback with your neighbors. Like, things like that matter. And that's community, and that's how we take care of ourselves. That's how we take care of each other. And so I think, like, it's really just, if you want to do something, do something.
That was beautiful. That's the new intro for the podcast. That was perfect. That was literally perfect. I like that you hit the nail. I hear so much on social media, like, oh, you don't have community. The community is like, go out and make one. Go talk to your neighbors. Go do whatever. Go talk to people. Go touch grass or whatever they say. Like, go do it. No, that was great, y'all. Thanks again. Thank you so much. I think that's a great way to end it. So just real quick. At What's Left of the South, we believe the South will rise again, but this time for the right reasons, those being worker-owned means of production, decolonization, and self-determination for all oppressed peoples. Make sure to click on our link tree in the show notes to find all of our social media and subscribe to our Patreon. Shout out to our new Patreon subscribers, Nikki, Jeremiah, Matt, and the Icelandic Volcano. Our producer is Mr. Speaker. Our theme music is by the band The Last Thing Remember, edited by Psychotic Refuge. We are coming to you from the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement, Montgomery, Alabama, as well as sweet Georgia and jolly old England. We also like to recognize we're recording on land that is occupied and rightfully belongs to the Muskogee and Creek Nations. Y'all, thank you so much for coming on. We really do appreciate it. And I think we can all agree, stop Cop City. And we hope that it fucking dies. So, good Lord willing, the creek don't rise. See y'all next time.
So I'm just a student, sir, and only want to learn. But it's hard to read through the rising smoke from the books that you like to burn. So I'd like to make a promise, and I'd like to make a vow that when I've got something to say, sir, I'm gonna say it now.